It's unbelievable how many pieces of Tolkien's life impacted Lord of the Rings, and it's nearly impossible to get a quick summary of these details. However, Don Marshall's bio on Tolkien offers a succinct and coherent layout of Tolkien's life. So join Don and I as we discuss how Tolkien has shaped modern fantasy. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to the White City Podcast. Today, I've got a new guest with me, Don Marshall, also known as Don Marshall 72, I think, right? On a
Yep.
lot of social media. And yeah, so it's great to have you on, Don. Um, and would you give a little bit of a kind of like bio of yourself and how you got into Lord of the Rings?
Yeah, absolutely. So I got my start with the Lord of the Rings a little bit differently than most. I was at the kitchen table and my mom was talking about the book that she was reading called The Lord of the Rings, and she was like summarizing a chapter, and I thought it sounded interesting, and so it kind of became this morning ritual where the night before my mom would read the chapter of whatever Lord of the Rings book she was reading and then summarize it for my sister and I at the breakfast table that next morning. And a couple of weeks into it, I think, I was told that there was a movie, and I thought, oh man, that's so cool. And then lo and behold, I get to watch the extended editions of The Fellowship of the Ring, and I am just immediately hooked. I mean, that whole first, I had to stop halfway through because we had to switch the discs out. But in between switching the discs, we realized I had to go get my sister from dance practice. My mom had to, so we had to stop. My mom and I had to go get my sister. I'm like, oh my God, I just want to keep watching this movie. And we couldn't. And I was like heartbroken. So I had to wait until the next time that my sister was not home because she was a little bit younger at the time and probably couldn't watch it. It was a little scarier for her, I think, than most. It wasn't an appropriate age for her to see it. But for me, I'm just like, no, no, no. This is, I need this injected right into my veins. This is exactly it. And I've sort of never really stopped loving Tolkien since. Loved the movies, loved the books, tried to take a crack at the Silmarillion a few times before finally getting that one that really stuck with me. And I've just been a lifelong fan.
And yeah, yeah. So how old were you whenever the movies came out?
Oh gosh, I think I was like 9 or 10 at the time, and by the time I saw the extended edition, I think I was closer to 11 or 12. But it was just this wonderful like conglomeration of all of my interests into something that felt a little bit more adult. Like I grew up on the Brian Jakes Redwall series and Del Toro's Quest and all of these like fun little fantasy genre books, the one-off spinners, the multi-part series that I just fell in love with. Chronicles of Narnia is in there as well, and just really, really fell in love with this genre and was like desperately searching for more because it was just what I wanted, to fill my days with. And lo and behold, here's this absolutely wonderful story that I didn't realize how deep the story went until many, many years later.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. Yeah, kind of have I have a similar. Well, I was probably the same age about whenever watched the films as well.
Hmm. Nice.
For sure. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Uh, it's probably six when they came out.
Oh, okay.
I watched them when I was pretty young. Them
I was
being
gonna
they're
say
pretty like
6 years old with that Bilbo scary face is gonna be.
yeah, no, that's true. So that's actually funny. When I remember like me and my siblings were hooked immediately. It's probably like one of the first like PG-13 movies we're watching and like you just thought it was really awesome.
Yeah. Yeah.
But like I remember the Bilbo scare scene like just scared my uncle. Just like he just jumped like first time
It
he watched it. It was crazy.
It's a
Like
truly shocking moment, and especially in that time, you didn't necessarily expect a jump cut like that at such a young age. You're like, this is just a movie. I'm just watching. Oh my goodness, what is wrong with this face? And suddenly it's just this like terror you feel.
Yeah. Yeah, the shock, like the shock factor, yeah, and just the sudden jolt, yeah. Definitely a good jump scare for
Yeah.
sure. Um so yeah, so let's talk about your book.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's
Um
do it.
J.R.R. Tolkien, the father of modern fantasy, I
Yep.
believe is the yep. Yeah,
Full
yeah,
title.
so that's full title. Um it's a really cool book. I just like as a very general, just kind of thought that I had. It was like very, very succinct, and I was really impressed by like the amount of detail that you were able to fit in there with like with the size of the book.
Thank
Like
you.
I was also very impressed too by like just like your knowledge of things.
Thank you. Yeah, I got a lot of Tolkien lore sort of dumped on me all at once when they when starting to write this book, and I sort of had a very cursory knowledge of him, and then sort of immediately had to jump into the deep end, realizing that, okay, I know sort of the general stuff of like World War II, very devout Roman Catholic, lost both of his parents, like the sort of general backstory things that you, as someone who's in the community, sort of pick up along the way. But I definitely wanted to make sure that like I got him as a whole person and not just, oh, he is a very famous author. Because I think so often people tend to put those sorts of folks on pedestals, or you know, pigeonhole them as just one thing. And I wanted to make sure it's like, no, no, no. J.R.R. Tolkien was a whole person.
Yeah, yeah, that's very true. Yeah, and I think you did that well, and I
Thank you.
appreciated also a lot of the parts that you were balancing, um, just about him. And I think I know you were talking about. Well, how about this? Let's first just go into like, what would you say makes this like biography like different from like other ones?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's significantly shorter. I'll start there. It's only about 240 pages, and the style is different than most biographies. We wanted to make it just something that could be digestible for someone that maybe wasn't as aware of all of the things going on in his life. So we broke it up into 100 short stories that are anywhere from 200 to 400 words, depending on the entry. But so much happened in Tolkien's life that we kind of wanted to segment it into certain parts so that, you know, his early years are very much like clustered into one set of stories, and then moving forward, here's his time as a student, and then here's his time in the war, and then here's his time getting jobs and working on the Lord of the Rings. And I think there's the little details is sort of where I find the true happiness of reading, those little nuanced things that make people real people rather than caricatures.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Like maybe I'll have to like talk about some more of these details, but I know there are definitely things that I learned. There was like more of hearing about stuff that I was always like, oh, okay, like I guess I like I imagine that's true about Tolkien in a sense. I never really read it myself to really get it, and then like reading your book, I'm like, oh, okay, I've heard heard this from somebody before talking about
Mhm.
Tolkien, and so it kind of just I guess how do you say cemented that stuff.
Thank you. Yeah, we're very fortunate that we get a lot of Tolkien's own words about his upbringing. They published, his son Christopher and the Tolkien estate published the letters of J.R.R. Tolkien, just hundreds of them that have to do with, you know, as many facets of his life as he can write about. And it was truly a blessing to not just have to use you know, the Lord of the Rings as a primary source, but now we're actually getting to hear from him in his own words. And to have that as a resource is just so invaluable because, you know, I'm not just, you know, the hearsay or the tall tales that you can sometimes get about these larger than life figures. We were able to sort of pull it directly from from their pens.
Right, yeah. And it's crazy how much of his life is really like has affected like what he wrote about Lord of the Rings, you know.
Yeah,
And I think that like it's a lot of it I think is probably more subtle a lot of times. So,
certainly. Yeah.
it's like, well, he wasn't exactly writing allegory, everybody says, but like I think there are more pieces of his life that he's probably pulling from and putting into his story than maybe you might think.
Oh, for sure. I mean, despite him like historically and very famously disliking allegory, I think anybody can look at, the landscape of Mordor and compare that to the shell-ridden battlefields of the Somme during World War One and say, "Oh yeah, that looks a little bit similar there." So, I think there's definitely some real-life inspiration that he drew, for sure.
Right. Yeah, yeah, definitely makes sense. So I mean, this covers like all his life. Your book does, right? And so I think maybe like one thing that I know you mentioned early on that was very much is one thing I guess I kind of appreciated um was just your remarks about him as a Catholic
Yeah.
and how the Christian themes have like been a strong pull or strong like kind of foundation in a lot of his works. And I mean I that's like a big part of my podcast actually is like talking about that stuff.
Hmm.
And what's been interesting is is how like on different like Facebook comments that I've made kind of like about the subject in general. It's like been some things that people have like responded back with like, well, Tolkien wasn't about allegory, so he wasn't drawing this one-to-one, comparison with the Bible and some other things like that. Um, and I think like I would agree in a lot of ways that's the case, but like for me, I guess I would say like the reason why I think that the themes are so great coming from his like Christian worldview is I think that it is like a foundation to the story in a big way. Where if you took this, I mean, obviously, if you like didn't have the Norse mythology connection there, a lot of things wouldn't be there either. But I just think there's a lot to just like his faith being in there. I think like you got things like um, redemption or hope. Um, that I would
Yeah.
see as big parts of his faith that would add to the story a lot,
Yeah,
I guess.
absolutely. And he brought so much of himself into the story, and I accredit a lot of that to his mom. His mom, and I talk about this in the book. His mom was raised, I believe it was Anglican, but then converted to Roman Catholic. And I think watching his mom convert, based on everything that I've read, sort of cemented that fact for Tolkien to just say, all right, this is a part of myself for him. And the constant struggle of good versus evil, like you mentioned, hope and redemption. I see a lot of that in Boromir. I see a lot of the hope, literally in Aragorn. Aragorn's name, his one of his false names is Estelle. It's literally the Elvish word for hope. So there's all of these very like intricate and not necessarily hidden details, but I think he weaves it in so beautifully that you don't even if you're not necessarily even looking for the religious stuff, you don't necessarily need to find it. But if you're looking at it through that lens, you can absolutely see it, and it's front and center through most of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Definitely. And it's one of those things too. It's like, I guess maybe because it is kind of more hidden that um, it has like, I don't know, it's almost like it's a deeper kind of, almost like a deeper meaning to it. Um, in a sense that I found than if it was just like this, full frontal, like C.S. Lewis, Chronicles of Narnia.
Yeah, that's a little bit more on the nose for sure. For sure.
But, yeah. So, yeah, so I think you kind of mentioned this, but another thing I've appreciated about the book too is just how it was very much like I found it to be like something that somebody who didn't know a lot about Lord of the Rings or Tolkien, if they wanted to like pick up something just to like figure out like, hey, what's like just kind of a rundown of like his life and things that have like affected Lord of the Rings. I thought that was like, hey, I think that would be really good for like somebody in that situation. So
Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to I wanted to make it a little bit more bite-sized and digestible. I've so many people online. I've had the pleasure of being an online content creator for almost 5 years now. And what I have seen time after time in my comments is that there are people that are just starting to read the book or have only seen the movies and just haven't quite taken that next step or want to take that next step but don't even know where to start. And so I hope that this book can be one of those sort of digestible quick reads that maybe it's a good beach read or something, and you're just looking for something to whet your palate, because there's so much more beyond what my book can offer, because I had to, condense a lot of the, stuff that he was involved in to a couple of stories. I mentioned World War One and his involvement in, two or three stories of the 100 that I write, but people have written whole books. John Garth writes an absolutely incredible book called Tolkien and the Great War, that's hundreds of pages long. And it's just like one of those beautiful moments when you realize that this story and this tale of this man's life goes so much deeper than typically what you would uh, imagine for someone who's gone through so much in his life.
yeah, yeah. Well, like yeah, let's talk a little bit more about like World War One, and so I know like something you had said in the book was that Tolkien like despised war.
Yes.
He didn't like war very much.
No.
And something that I've kind of like been kind of like thought about too though is all right, what about like the Rohirrim charging and saying death and glory like in the battle? Like what's Tolkien trying to get across with that? If he's not I don't know, yeah.
Oh, it's such an interesting like duality of Tolkien, because on the one hand, yeah, you've got this anti-industrialization, anti-war message where like the brutality is there, and the dark side, if you will, not to make this a Star Wars reference, but the dark side of things. But then you've got this other side of the coin where it's these beautiful, valiant people who are brave, charging to what will almost certainly be their own deaths, and glorifying that in a way. And I think the fact is that Tolkien was a human and saw, the duality of it, because for so much, and I will go on about World War One at length, so please stop me if I go on for too long. There is such a duality of war when it comes to World War One, because you have that old, Napoleonic, chivalrous, raising your sword under the cannon fire style of fighting, taking the guns and raising them up and waiting for the charges, and you just have to fire. And then, here comes this new line of warfare that brings in artillery and barbed wire and tunneling and aircrafts and all of these, this new industrialized way to destroy the world around him. And I think that's a lot of what Tolkien saw working in his time uh, as a soldier. And I think, there's something to that, in that, he brings a lot of that darkness and that despair to his trilogy. Because keep in mind, probably one of the most important things I mentioned in the book is that by the time he's done with the war, a lot of his friends are dead. And so he's just not necessarily alone, because he still, has companions with him, but by a much larger standard, a lot of them are dead, and it affects him. I think he brings that with him throughout his whole life, and he carries that weight.
Yeah. So like also um, reading some of this had, like remind me of the Tolkien movie. Did you ever watch that movie?
So I have a confession to make, and I might get some flack for this, but no, I have not. I have been meaning to for years, and I have not gotten around to it. But as soon as I had signed the contract for this book, I said to myself, okay, I can't watch it until I finish the book. And so I have sort of made it a point to, on the day that the book comes out, I'm going to watch the movie and sort of see how it is in comparison to my book. But I didn't want to bias myself. I didn't necessarily want to. I tried to take as much content and tell his story in his own words and things that were verifiable and not dramatize it, right? Not make it all as dramatic as it could be or lean one way or the other. So I didn't necessarily want to take from that particular movie, which may have taken creative liberties, or from the Humphrey Carpenter biography, which I do quote a few times, but sparingly. So, like, I didn't read the entirety of the Carpenter biography because I very much wanted this to be a primary sources style of writing because, and this is where I'm very grateful about the letters that existed. So much of Tolkien's life is captured by things like the Tolkien Society, things like remarks by his son Christopher in the books published after his father's death, and there's so much nuance there that I wanted to make sure that I got everything as accurate as I could, and I'd like to think that I did a pretty good job.
Yeah, no, that I thought it was done pretty well overall.
Thank you.
And I appreciate that, like, because it's almost like kind of a similar thing with people saying, "Oh, like I didn't want to watch the movies because it would ruin my imagination from the books," kind of a thing, you know?
Yeah, yeah, and I'm the same way in that I will almost always read the books first. But in my particular case, because it's an autobiography, I thought, okay, let's see if I can find something directly from the source before I lean into the dramatization of it first.
Right. Yeah. Um, definitely. So I guess like yeah, there are like other things that you had mentioned that maybe I was also kind of like confused about with like my
Oh,
knowledge of things and what
okay,
I thought
yeah,
had happened.
okay.
So like one of those is like so there are two things.
Mhm.
One's the Book of Lost Tales and the other's the Silmarillion.
Yes.
So I've been told that the Silmarillion like Tolkien didn't set out to write the Silmarillion.
Mm.
Is that true? Or is that
Oh
because
God.
like
Sorry, it's such a complicated answer. But the short answer is probably he was always setting out to write the Silmarillion. I think he was obsessed in a very positive way, or let's say passionate. He was very passionate in his own way about this mythology that he was creating. He loved the Norse mythology, the Elder Edda, the Volsung saga, all of these things that were ancient relics of the past, but that harkened back to a time where stories were these grand epic tales, Beowulf and Fafnir the Dragon, and Dante's Inferno, and all of these stories that are make the characters almost larger than life. And I think he, in his own way, wanted to create his own version of that through the poetry that he was writing, through the languages that he was developing. So I think, in a way, he never set out to create the Silmarillion, but in my mind, the Silmarillion was like the natural evolution and the culmination of what he started from. starts with the language, then he creates the characters that say the words in that language, then he creates the setting that those characters say the words in, and he builds one brick on top of another into this foundation that, unfortunately, because of the way publishing worked back then and the way books were sold, the Silmarillion never really got to be published while he was alive. And as much as he would have liked those stories to have been told, he never saw those stories told the way he really sort of wanted them to. And I think I mentioned this in the book. One of his goals was to have the Lord of the Rings be released alongside the Silmarillion as a kind of duology. But the publishers just straight up said no, because they didn't think it would sell well. And I think in his mind, it would have lessened the story, because told in total, it would have been the full tale of the first age, the second age, and the third age. And I think that would have been a much more cohesive story, but I also don't think it would have made I don't think it would have made the professor as famous as he got. And then I don't think we would have gotten the Silmarillion at all. So I'm grateful for the way it worked out.
Cool. All right. Yeah. So we were just talking about the Silmarillion. Yeah. And so do we I mean, Tolkien, do you think he would have called it the Silmarillion, or is that just hey, it's pretty much the same thing as the Silmarillion, so we're kind of just going to call that to let everybody know what it is?
So probably not. When he was first getting his start, a little bit before World War II began, he was calling it the Book of Lost Tales. So that's sort of where the idea of the Book of Lost Tales comes from, that Christopher Tolkien used. But I think in his mind, this world that he created of Arda was just the most detail oriented sort of thing, that he was just penning down the stories that happened in his own imagination, and what an imagination it was. But I don't think he would have called it the Silmarillion. That would have probably made it focused too much on the sacred gems, which are an important part of it. But I think in Tolkien's mind, he probably would have liked to have kept that Book of Lost Tales, because you've got so many things from the beginning of time, even before the First Age, and then of course the events of the First Age, which almost entirely deal with the Silmarils. But then you've got everything from the Second Age that's also in the Silmarillion. That in itself is, a tale on its own, with the fall of Gondolin, or excuse me, the fall of Numenor, or then we should, I guess, say the rise and fall of Numenor. And then the Third Age, of course, being about the Rings of Power, and just how this sort of, I call it an almost apocalyptic setting, where, the magic has left the world. The tales of old are quite literally lost to time. And it is only through these people that, the hobbits are gathering the stories, and the humans like Aragorn that are remembering it, and, singing them in songs and tales through that way.
Yeah. Yeah. So is the Book of Lost, there is a Book of Lost Tales book now, right?
Yes. So that particular nomenclature comes because it is the first two volumes of Christopher Tolkien's 12-part series, The History of Middle-earth, which is basically how to describe it other than just this magnum opus of literature. It is a 12-part series that Christopher Tolkien took the thousands of pages of notes of his father, and I write about this in the book, the thousands of pages of notes that his father still had after he died, and tried to make sense of it, tried to sort out a timeline of where the tale of Beren and Luthien is compared to the fall of Gondolin, compared to the fall of Numenor, and all of these tales that are sort of interwoven in this one setting. The Book of Lost Tales is a collection of sort of those early stories that would eventually become the full Silmarillion. So you've got tale like and they go into way more detail. They cut off at certain points where there's no sort of ending. But right now, if you were to pick up the first two volumes of the Book of Lost Tales, you would be very confused indeed, because a lot of it all still relates back to the Silmarillion, which was published first, and given a little bit less of the nuance of the stories that you'll find in the Book of Lost Tales.
Okay, yeah, because like the Book of Lost Tales is like what he was writing, or what he was calling it, that he was writing early on, like even around World War I, right? So did those stories like change at all, like
Oh,
when he was writing the
constantly.
Lord of the Rings? Because like the Hobbit, he like completely changed the Hobbit book. So
He did, yes, and I write about this too in the book as well. It's a little bit of a spoiler, but back in the first edition of The Hobbit, Gollum willingly gives up the ring and shows Bilbo out of the cave. And in creating The Lord of the Rings, he realized that this magical ring that he had was going to play a significantly more important role. And so he goes back in a couple of years later and says, okay, I need to change this. And the publishers say, okay. And so the second edition changes a little bit of what Gollum's demeanor is towards, excuse me, changes a little bit of what Gollum's demeanor is towards Bilbo, and then just kind of makes it a little bit more conscientious of this new series that he's writing. The Silmarillion was not like that, though. What came from the Silmarillion, I think, was being built alongside. He was constantly writing poetry. Tolkien was constantly, changing his mind about things. Galadriel and Celeborn have like two or three different origin stories. The Blue Wizards have a couple of different names. He changed his mind about what happened to them every so often. The same is true about the origin of orcs. And, we can find there's literally commentary by Tolkien's son, Christopher. We can find notes that Christopher said, here we saw on a sheet of paper that my father had written a full paragraph completely scratched out. And then on the next line, that same paragraph rewritten and a few notes changed. So we have these things that conflict with each other that Christopher, I think, it just had to try and make heads or tails of. And I give a lot of credit to Christopher for keeping his father's legacy. Without Christopher, I don't think Tolkien is nearly as popular as he is today. He did a remarkable job trying to make sure that his father's work was respected and that there was such a constant stream of releases that built up such a passionate fan base.
yeah, because he would have had to have like picked out the notes that were consistent across the whole board.
Exactly. Yeah, and
Yeah.
and there is so much that contradicts within just the tales themselves. And then you look at a couple of things, like the time he tried to write a science fiction novel with C.S. Lewis. And I think I mentioned this in the book as well. Tolkien wanted to deal with time travel, and Lewis wanted to deal, I think, with space travel. But the time travel was just his version of the first age, and then Numenor in the second age, and then I think a little bit more in the third age, and it followed this father and son group. And he couldn't help himself but go back to this world that he had created, no matter how hard he tried, even if it was changing genres. So it's no wonder that, things started to contradict each other just from the start.
Yeah. So one thing I would like to talk about a little bit
Yeah.
of is your Lord of the Rings like role playing um game
Oh,
that
the
you've done
TTRPG
on
that I
like,
run.
yeah, like on YouTube and stuff that you've done. Yeah. So I haven't really done a really I've never played D&D. I've never really played any of those like role playing games.
Okay.
I mean, I've played video games, but yeah, like tell a little bit more about that. Like, I know everybody has like is everybody given a role? set ahead of time and
It works like this. I'm very fortunate in that myself and the players that I play with gave me a lot of leeway. I basically created an alternate version of Middle Earth where the Fellowship of the Ring does take the eagle to Mordor. It's a very well known asked question. Why didn't they just take the eagles to Mordor? And I, as what's called the lore master, basically craft a narrative, and I give out roles to the players that I'm playing with. So it was me and four of my friends. Some of them wanted to play elves, some of them wanted to play dwarves. We brought in some guest characters to play humans, and then I was playing a couple of characters as well. And essentially, what it is it's the ability to interact and role play using our imagination within a Middle Earth setting. Now, for things like Dungeons and Dragons, there's a lot of different settings, right? You can go to the Feywild, you can go to the Sword Coast, you can go to any number of, fictional realities that exist within the books that you can buy at any, bookstore or local game shop. But TTRPGs offer such a unique sort of way to use our imagination in that it's basically boundless except for the rules we want to follow. Anything can happen, but so long as we all agree to it, it's a cohesive story that we're all telling together. And I think that's a really beautiful way of just cooperatively having fun together.
yeah. Yeah, I think that lore master thing and like that role in like the game seems to me like I don't I don't know that my imagination is such that I would be able to come up with like such a great story every time, but
Well, that's the fortunate part is that you don't have to. Most times, and this is true of the system that the One Ring system that exists within Middle Earth, they have pre-planned out adventures for you when they release different books. So, like for example, that very first book that came out, I think a couple of years ago by Free League Publishing. They published something called the One Ring, and that's the system that they use. And they, tell you what dice you need to, roll for various, chances on things you want to take, for actions that you want to take, because there is an element of chance that comes with these games, right? You have to say, well, I don't know if that person's going to agree to what you just said when we were role playing. Let's make these dice. Let's roll these dice and sort of take that chance and see what happens. And people, the people that make the series will often include those sorts of things, saying, okay, well, here's the sort of storyline that you're going to follow. In this particular game, you're going to play as hobbits and you're going to be searching for some lost treasure. But if you don't want to play that, you can play some rangers, and then you're going to go rescue a kidnapped man. And then you can play that adventure. Or if you want to play some elves that are killing a dragon, you can do anything really that you want to in these sorts of games. And the great part about it is that the community is so thriving that people are writing their own adventures and then giving them out for free. So if you go online and just search Middle Earth adventures and TTRPGs, you can absolutely find something that is manageable for a completely new person. And that's what I love about this community.
what does TTRPG stand for?
Excuse me. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself with my jargon. It is called a tabletop role-playing game. So we are sitting
Okay.
at a tabletop. We are role-playing our various characters, and it is a game. So tabletop role-playing game. And when you
Right.
play, it's usually around the kitchen table with a bunch of friends, or on a video chat like we are, using the theater of the mind. Sometimes we can use things like maps, whether they be hand drawn or little miniature figures that are only the size of your hand to go on the table, or just little pictures of things if you're online. But it truly is some of the most fun that I have had in the Lord of the Rings universe. And I'd like to think that if Tolkien were alive today, he would love that his work inspired Dungeons and Dragons and the TTRPG genre.
So D&D is also TTRPG then.
Yes, D&D
Okay.
was one of the first TTRPGs to really catch on, gain that popularity in the 70s, and then just take the world by storm over the course of, the last decade. D&D really took the world by storm, just really am impressed by how well it's done. But yeah, we're also very fortunate now that there are many TTRPGs out there, not just Dungeons and Dragons. So if you like playing in the world of Brandon Sanderson and the Stormlight Archives, there's going to be one for that. There's one specifically for vampires. There's one specifically designed for Lord of the Rings. There's one specifically designed for Baldur's Gate. If you're a fan of the Baldur's Gate 3 video game, there's just so much that can be done. And then there's also some for science fiction as well. Sorry, I just keep going on tangents. There's truly so many that you can do. But it's the beauty of this kind of game is that it is almost endless in what we can do with it.
So probably like one of my last questions here would be like what to you makes like Lord of the Rings great?
Oh, that's such a hard question, but mostly because I think my mind changes about that answer every few months or so. Because I think the thing for me that makes the Lord of the Rings great is how many layers there are. It's truly like an onion. You start with one aspect of Tolkien and it catches your interest. For me, it was the movies. But then you peel back the layer, and suddenly there's the extended editions of the movies, or there's the Hobbit book that you're reading for the first time, or there's the trilogy that you're reading for the first time. And then once you're done reading those books, oh, all of a sudden there's the Silmarillion, or there's the Book of Lost Tales, or there's Tolkien's other short stories. And one by one, you start peeling back these layers and you see, all of the languages that he constructed. There are people out there. Shout out to Tengwar Teacher and Wizardway Chris and David Solo and Sallow and all of these people that are putting in effort just to try and teach people the Elvish language, right? That is their entire, breadth of study, but it's just one part of a much larger, cohesive legendarium that Tolkien created. But then there's also the history side of things. There's the academic side of things. There's the linguistic side of things. There's the artistic part where, people are bringing digital art and oil canvases and paintings and drawings and all of these beautiful works of art to life. There's cosplay. There's these, incredibly talented costume designers and seamstresses and just incredibly talented people that are bringing all of this positivity and creativity to the Tolkien fandom. And I truly think we are one of the luckiest fandoms out there to have such a thriving community that still exists in such a positive light that has withstood, the test of time. I can't really think of any other, books that were published in the 1950s that sort of share the same vein as Tolkien. He, in a way, is, pardon the pun for it being the tagline of my own book, the father of modern fantasy. But I truly think that is what makes The Lord of the Rings and J.R.R. Tolkien so great.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're right. It is pretty like yeah, just to think back is having such a fan base, since he wrote the books is like pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I do like really appreciate how it's something I feel like you can always like kind of dive deeper into with Lord of the
Yes,
Rings and like Middle Earth, and
absolutely.
like you were saying, like you kind of start out as a hobbit and then you kind of, work your way up to Gandalf, as you move
No,
along.
truly, exactly. You start off as these people who are, don't really know too much, but then if you decide to dive deep into Tolkien, you can become wise in that lore, and it's truly incredible to sort of peel back all of those layers.
Yeah, no, it really is. Yeah, yeah. It's one of those things. It's like it's fun to geek about. It's fun to geek about, I guess. Yeah, but
Yeah.
um, man, thanks for coming on.
Of
This
course,
has
man,
been
this is a
awesome.
blast. This is a
So
blast.
yeah, this is great, man. And I hope your book goes well.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
If I'm not sure when this will be releasing, but if you're interested, it is called J.R.R. Tolkien, the father of modern fantasy. You can get it wherever I think books are sold. It's on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Bookshop.org, and also something I can finally announce because it just came out not too long ago. You can now pre-order the audiobook, which I recorded myself. Was not ever planning on doing that. I had very limited voiceover work before, and being in a studio for that long was terrifying. But yeah, you can also pre-order the audiobook that I narrate.
Nice. Yeah. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in, and we'll catch you for our next episode next week.